He's the founding member of the Global Health Decolonization movement in Africa, which is a collaboration of African academics and researchers that are working towards shifting power imbalances that plague the practice of global health. Sam is a public health physician by training and currently works as a senior program specialist with Canada's International Development Research Centre, where he manages a portfolio of research grants across Africa. So, in addition to his interest in decolonizing global health, Sam is the creator and host of Medics Text Africa, which is a podcast that showcases digital health innovations across Africa. He is a co-founder and Secretary General of the Network of Impact Evaluation Researchers in Africa, and he's also a fellow of the Royal Society for Public Health. So we welcome you, Sam, and you can proceed with the presentation.
Thank you very much, Itumeleng. Such a pleasure and honor to be here. Can you hear me okay, everyone?
Very well from my side.
All right, I will project my screen in a minute. All right, here we go. This is weird. All right, can you see the slide deck?
Not yet, Sam. We've seen your. Yeah.
All right, this is weird. Oh, okay. Hopefully that should work. How is this?
Yep.
There you go. We need to just put it into presentation mode.
All right, got it. I presenter view. How is that? Does that sound good?
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam.
Great, looking good. Great. So hi, everyone, and such a pleasure to be here to talk about decolonizing global health. I bring you greetings from my fellow member of GHDM Africa, Jabu, who some of you are familiar with. He is based at UKZN. He's currently away for a short course in Switzerland, so sends his apologies, but would have really loved to be here today. So why decolonization? And I think this cartoon, some of you might have seen it in the aftermath of when South Africa detected the Omicron variant and the reaction of the global community to that variant, and how it just sort of embodies almost everything that is wrong with the global health architecture today, in terms of power dynamics, in terms of power, in terms of privilege, in terms of supremacy, in terms of racism. These are all issues that we have to deal with as people in the global South. Again, I hate that term, global South. What does it even mean? But for lack of a better term, it's what we have to use. This is what we have to put up with. I reckon that if Omicron had been discovered in the United States or in Canada or somewhere else in the West, that such depictions would certainly not even occur to anyone. But because it's Africa, because it's us, then it's easier for such behaviors to happen. And I think this article by Sheye Abimbola, who some of you might know, the editor-in-chief at BMJ Global Health, he has been a strong advocate of decolonizing global health. And he says that global health as currently practiced has many asymmetries in power and privilege. And so coloniality is just one of the many manifestations of this elephant in the room that sorts of is a representation of the power imbalances in the practice of global health. And so the objectives for today is really to try to surface some of these manifestations of coloniality in global health, And we're going to use lived experiences of global health researchers on the continent. And then we'll talk a bit about how what we are trying to do as a movement to address some of these manifestations. Now, like probably most of you, I don't like to be talked at. I prefer to be talked with. And so the format I'm hoping will be that we will start with a very interactive session, and I'm calling it lived experiences, where I present a real life case scenario, and I would ask, what would you do if you were in that circumstance? Some of you who are religious might remember the what would Jesus do mantra back in the 80s and 90s. So what would you do if you were in the shoes of this particular researcher? And I'll pause after each slide and get very quick reactions. And I'm okay with awkward silence. So I would only move to the next slide if I get somebody to intervene. I really want us to get engaged with the session. And after that, I'll talk a bit about GHDM Africa, and then we can have a bit more open discussion in general about the idea of decolonization, etc. But I always like to start with a disclaimer. I am not a decolonization scholar by any means, and I don't want to be tagged as one. I am simply an advocate of decolonial praxis. There are decolonization scholars, as far as I know, for many years, many decades, Franz Fanon, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you know, and these are voices that have been talking about decolonization for decades and have been largely ignored, of course, as is everything with the power dynamics as far as epistemic injustices are concerned in research, in academia, and in development in general. So I'm not a scholar, and that's not my intent. I'm just an advocate of praxis. So let's begin with these lived experience. There's just a handful of them, so please indulge me, bear with me. And I'll start with the first one. So your co-investigator, so you have this joint project with a co-investigator from the United States. The co-investigator visits you for a few months and returns to the United States, and after a few weeks sends you a fully drafted manuscript. And she asks that you do a very quick review and that she is happy to include you as a co-author on this manuscript on a project for which you are PI and that you are jointly implementing. What would you do? Again, I'm okay with awkward silence, so I'll wait until somebody intervenes.
There's a hand from Feroza.
Please, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you so much. I actually have experienced this, not from an international colleague, but a local one. You know, and it was a group of us working on a research project, and someone who actually wasn't even part of the research group, but who had just been, you know, roped in. Well, she was offering advice, and so was quite familiar with what we were doing. Ended up doing exactly that. Drafted a paper, then sent it to her HOD in a very different department and said, you know, this is what we're doing. Who else should I include in this? Long story short, it then ended up back with us, and we're like, but this is not her work. This is our work. We've literally done all of it. So as a group, it was also during lockdown. So as a group, we basically sent an email saying, you know, actually, it's our work. It's not yours. So we did confront the situation, right? But the problem was the person involved didn't actually, there was an apology, but didn't seem to realize, it just kind of went over her head, that you can't invite authors to be a co-author on a project. And there were various ways that we could have done this. We could have reported her. It could have gone through a disciplinary process. But she was a young researcher. We put it down to inexperience, and we said, okay, fine. And the rest of the group didn't want to do anything further about it, but I decided to be a bit more harsh and send a further email and say, I understand, I appreciate your apology, but please understand that this is why it was unacceptable, because I don't think you actually get that. And she was actually working for me at the time. She quit on the spot. Left student groups completely stranded, just completely unprofessional behavior. But where possible, where it's as overt as that, you've got to call it out. So yeah.
Okay. No, thank you for sharing that. And I think the situation is slightly different, that you were in a place of power where you could push back. But think for a moment that this was someone who, was from an international investigator, had probably played an instrumental role in you getting the grant to begin with. So the power dynamics might be, I think they'll be different. And your ability to push back might not be, you might not have that agency to push back as you did in this particular instance. But thank you so much for sharing that. Let's move on to the next case scenario. So
there were three other hands. I'm not sure if you want to take them now or later.
If I might ask, let them pause. They can come in towards the end. I'll just like to take one intervention for each case study, and then towards the end we can have everyone can come in, please, so that I can move through the slides. And sorry about that. There'll be an opportunity for people to come in. So just one intervention per slide, per case. All right. So the next one is you receive a request from a former collaborator at the University of Australia. He's just won a grant and would like you to collaborate on a topic that is of mutual interest. The study site will be in Kailicha. I hope I'm saying that right. And he says he'll be willing to offer you a whopping $500,000 over 3 years as a sub-grant. What would you do? Any hands?
There's Pancho.
Please go ahead.
Oh, no, sorry. That was for the previous. Someone else can go.
Oh, okay. But if you have thoughts on this one, what would you do?
I would actually be grateful. I'm confused. I don't see the problem here. Sorry.
Okay, no, fair enough.
Emma?
There's no wrong or right answer. Fair enough. You would be grateful. Does someone have a different reaction?
Yes, I do. Hi, my name's Emma.
Yes, Emma.
I mean, this is not unusual, and it's an assumption that the sites will just be available and you can write them into your grant. What should have happened is there should have been collaboration at the grant writing stage and the local investigators brought in. I would be super annoyed, and I would want to look at the budget and the grant and see, one doesn't, being soft-funded, I don't sneer at money, but I would want to see how this budget was allocated and how we could do the project, and then whether the budget actually worked with what they were intending to do. And I would try and, well, I would need to say that this we really should have been brought in from the beginning, but no, people don't realize. It just doesn't even cross their minds, in my experience. Thanks.
No, thank you for that, Emma. So of course, $500,000 is a lot of money. And for most of us that rely on soft funding, as you said, it's difficult to snare at this amount of money. But then this is a lot of assumptions. How do you know that this is enough for what we are planning to do? Why didn't you involve us from the beginning? And how much are you getting? So to me, that is even more important. How much are you getting out of this? I've been in situations like this where I'm offered an amount and I don't even know what the prime recipient is getting. And yet I'm going to do all the work, most of the work, Thank you for that, Emma. But again, this is a difficult one. If you're in a place where you're under pressure to raise grant funding, it's hard to say no to this. But then it seems, like you said, there are issues with the assumptions that have been made. Another one. So this actually happened to me in particular. I was a co-author on a paper. And we got feedback from one of the reviewers that includes this sentence. It seems that the authors, yours truly, and my colleagues, as well as the entire people of Africa, you know, the 1 billion of us, need balanced education in the food and health continuum. What would your reaction be to this this peer reviewer? Anybody? Itumeleng, any hands? Or are people shocked?
No hands yet. Still waiting.
Are people as shocked as I was when I?
The first hand is Pancho.
No,
Please go
I
ahead.
just want to ask. No, I just wanted to clarify. Can you give more context, please? Because it's difficult to say.
No. There's. I mean, the person gave a whole lot of great comments, but sort of concluded all the comments with this sentence that based on, you know, everything we've done in our manuscript, it seems that we need to be educated, and the entire people of Africa need to be educated about the topic that we were writing about. Do you find it an okay comment, or am I overreacting to?
There is a comment
this
from
kind of-
Monica.
Yes, please go ahead.
Or Leslie, let's maybe go to Prof. London first, because there's a hand.
Yes, let's Prof.
Thanks. It's an extraordinary comment, and the thing that strikes me, besides it, you know, that is obviously paternalistic and self-important, is that this assumption that people of Africa, I mean, they can be rude to the authors and condescending to the authors, but the idea that the people of Africa can benefit by some wisdom, it's just such a reductionist view of you know, there's one uniform people of Africa, and generalizing to all people of Africa. I find it astonishing, actually, as a comment.
So I didn't overreact. I was shocked, and if it wasn't left to me, would have even withdrawn the paper. But I guess we felt we had gone so far and put a lot of hard work. But yes, I found it absolutely paternalistic, absolutely condescending. But then we get exposed. I'm sure many of you have to similar comments, maybe not as brazen, but similar comments. Let's quickly take one more. Thank you, Prof. You are a co-investigator on a project in Gugulethu. You propose to your co-investigators in Netherlands that now that you have agreed on a best intervention, you did a formative study, you believe that an RCT will not be feasible or acceptable in the study location, and so you propose a quasi-experimental study instead. But your counterparts in Netherlands refuse and insist that an RCT is rigorous, it's going to get you into the Lancet, etc. And this is a $10 million grant. How would you react? Again, these are real life stories. I've just changed a few things, but these happen to people I know or to me personally. What would you do? $10 million. Wow, that's a truckload of money. Anybody? Itumeleng?
No one yet.
Anybody?
And no comment yet.
Going once? Or is this fine? Would you just take the money? It's okay if you just take the money and do what they say. Please say. That's fine.
We've got Nziki.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know, from these 3 case studies, it appears that, you know, for as long as you are based in Africa, you don't have authority over your own work, and that others are based on the access that they have to funding, seem to leverage that and deny you an opportunity, you know, to make the principal decision. So, I mean, it's really just, I mean, these cases are all upsetting. So I'm looking forward to a more positive experience.
So would you say yes or no? Long story short, yes or no, would you take the money and do what they say? $10 million, think about it.
Well, I mean, I personally would say no, but I don't know about other people, because for me, it's really about having power over your voice and the work that you're doing, and also understanding what would be most relevant for that particular community and the study that you're undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the team that was involved, they said no. They pushed back because they knew this actually happened here in Kenya, and it was in a slum, in formal setting. They knew they couldn't randomize. It was just not possible. But eventually the team in Netherlands yielded, and so it ended up being a quasi-experimental study. But they had to fight. It left a bitter taste in the mouths of a lot of people. And this is the last one. So you have a disagreement with your Canadian co-investigator over the direction of the project. A week later, you learn that she has arrived Cape Town and is conducting a site visit to the study area without your knowledge. What would you do? Tumaleng, anybody?
I saw Emma's hand in the last round. Maybe she might be happy to take this one.
I can, but I'll let other people speak because I've been contributing already. So maybe
That's fine.
If there's someone else.
Anybody else? It's the last one, so let's finish and move on.
There's Jessica and Pancho. Jessica first.
Jessica.
Hi, sorry, my mic was giving me some issues. I would be very upset and think that this person had behaved in quite an immature way. I'd hopefully try and I would try and confront them, but I can imagine that might be quite difficult if the power dynamics and it might not be possible, or I might not feel empowered enough to do that. But I would be very upset.
Thank you so much for that. And that's, again, like I said, these are all real life cases. I didn't make anything up other than changing the characters, maybe the amounts involved. And I'm sure it's not new to many of you. These are the things we go through, in terms of and I'm not trying to paint the global north as evil. Please don't get that impression. I've had many amazing collaborations with colleagues in the global north, but I've had some really horrible ones. And some I believe are malicious. Others are from willful, ignorant bliss, perhaps. But nonetheless, the consequences on my esteem, my confidence as a researcher, it has suffered as a result of some of these power imbalances. And so a group of colleagues and I came together to put up this group, Global Health Decolonization Movement in Africa. And we're just volunteering our time to try to see how we can raise awareness and bring about change, pragmatic change, to these power imbalances that we see occurring on a daily basis in global health. And we have three strategies, really: coordinated advocacy, things like signing petitions together. We have things like strategic communication. That's another approach. And I'll talk a bit more about that because that's where we've done most of our intervention. And patient capital, where we are trying to see how we can persuade our governments to invest more in research and in global health in general, because we feel part of these power dynamics are perpetuated by the funding landscape, right? And so this heavy reliance on Western funding puts us at the mercy of some of these behaviors. And so in terms of strategic communication, we hosted a webinar on decolonizing global health sometime last year, very well attended. You might know some of the people on the screen: Catherine Chobutungi, who is the executive director at APHRC here in Kenya, Dr. Mosoka Fala, who's done great work on the Ebola vaccine in Liberia. And we published a newsletter out of that. But I really want to spend a bit of time on our publications. And I think one of the key publications that has come out of our work is the one to your, I think it's my left, the pragmatic approaches to decolonizing global health in Africa. And this is not directed at the global south. This is really directed at our colleagues in the global north to sort of give them a sense of what we hope can change in terms of the way global health is practiced. And then the publication that we have that Jabu and I publish on decolonizing global health sort of summarizes what is in this should I call it guide, practical guide that we developed for our colleagues in the global north. And we address the common manifestations of coloniality from a very pragmatic perspective and at different layers. So we look at different stakeholders in the global health landscape and try to curate a set of what we're calling ways to decolonize for the various common manifestations of coloniality that we have experienced in our lives. For example, for any of you who have, who are schooled in the West, and perhaps we're also guilty of that in our schools of public health on the continent as well, that our curriculum or our curricula fails to acknowledge that global health actually is it's a cousin or a niece of colonial medicine, right? So and so lots of times our curriculum doesn't acknowledge this past and the kind of impacts it has on the practice of global health today. And so we are calling for curricular renewals that things about incorporating transformative learning, cognitive justice approaches. And really, creating a space where, people can talk about the colonial history of global health and of medicine in general. And I think that could sort of raise the sensitivity levels, we hope, in terms of the way global health is practiced. Of course, like I said, funding is a major culprit, let me put it that way, of these power imbalances. And some of it is embedded into the funding processes, such as external review, where you have panels that don't understand the context, are looking out for metrics, they're looking out for indicators that don't really represent the reality of our context. And so they make decisions that will always sort of be skewed towards people who are familiar with their ways of thinking and their ways of doing things. And so we are calling on funders to reject, this what we're calling parasitic or parachute research proposals, where people dive into Africa, do research and fly out and use us as, data collectors. We're asking them to diversify their panels, the external review panels, to ensure that there's representation of people who understand the context. Of course, scientific journals, with the case study I gave, you also know that they play a role in perpetuating some of these power imbalances. And we are seeing some good moves now. We are calling on publishers, journals to diversify their editorial teams, etc., and for editors to play a mediating role to avoid the kinds of derogatory feedback that some of us tend to be subjected to. The media doesn't help. Going back to my second slide of that cartoon, they are depictions of us, and so we feel that they're also contributing to the challenges that we're facing. And so they need to be more aware and to sensitize their teams that even though non-Africans might have expertise about African issues, then there needs to be a balance with people who actually, are Africans and actually live in Africa, right? So that there's some balance in the views that even if it's targeted at their own audiences. So in summary, we have a bias for action. There's a whole constituency of researchers and academics that are leading the work on theorizing about how global health can decolonize. but we want to, we just have a bias for pragmatic action. And of course, it's attracted critics. People say, they've used all kinds of terminology. They say we just addressing the issue from a very superficial perspective. Decolonization is not a metaphor. It's the wrong word to begin with. Some are saying we're not even going far enough. There should be some kind of violence. Some say we are conflating diversity, equity, and inclusion with decolonizing global health. And I remember when I after we published that paper on decolonizing global health, where the Southern Voices, a researcher from Germany sent me an inbox saying that we are undermining science, and we're not. That we're going to create a situation where there's just this unhelpful antagonism between global North and global South research. But you know, everyone is entitled to their opinion. But our major response is to the one on the superficiality of our approach, because that seems to be the most recurring one. And we are saying that there's this false dichotomy between immediate practical actions and addressing the root causes of these power imbalances. And I like what this researcher in Canada said, Monica Chowdhury, that she would compare this false dichotomy to, you know, a bucket and a tap, right? And the bucket is leaking. That, of course, you know, if you're faced with such a scenario, the obvious thing to do is to turn off the tap, right? But we know that we know that in life in general, when we think about other inequalities, think about gender inequalities, think about racial inequalities, turning off the tap has never been simple. It's been generational long struggles. Right. And that's not to say we shouldn't try and we shouldn't continue trying, but there are things that we can do in the interim to patch the bucket up, right, and prevent it from leaking as much as we can while we figure out how to turn off the tap. And so that's, again, a very pragmatic metaphor of how we're approaching this, that yes, we know things like training people in diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversifying panels, etc. They're superficial. They don't get to the root causes, but they can make, you know, incremental changes that will make a real difference in the lives of global health practitioners in the global South. And so that's why we are making a case for this. And of course, there are dangers, right? I can sit here and talk to you confidently about decolonizing global health, even though I work for a global North institution, simply because my institution has created a safe space for us to have these kinds of conversations. But it's not the case in many other institutions. In fact, two of our founding members, not long after we founded GGHM Africa, had to leave us. They had to quit because they got jobs in some international NGOs and they just didn't feel that their jobs would be safe, right? And so, and you know, so there are these risks that are involved, but I think, and so let's not have any pretenses about or illusions about the risks and dangers of speaking up about decolonization. So that's it from me in a nutshell. And so my question to you is, where do you stand? We stand on the side of pragmatism. It's okay. I know we are academics. It's okay to think about the more theoretical, conceptual issues, and that's fine. But my question to you is, where do you belong? And what would you like to see changing in either in our movement or in the decolonization movement in general? So I'll stop there and hand over the mic back to Itumeleng to take any reactions and interventions from colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. I think the first hand I saw back, it's Pancho.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly say, in my own experience, I was applying to, let me just say, European Union global health opportunity while it was European. And I had to jump through so many hoops just to get my UCT degree recognized. But the first hoop I had to jump through was just to speak with a previous fellow who did this program. And her immediate question was, actually, are you even eligible for this? This is for Europeans. So that person assumed that merely that I was asking about how to, you know, have my South African UCT degree recognized, that I wasn't European, which of course wasn't true. Obviously, that's the basic criterion. It's an EU citizen fellowship. But that's just an experience. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And UCT is the #1 ranked university in Africa. So you can imagine if you are struggling to have your credentials recognized, how about the rest of us? All right. Yeah. Anyway, that's so we talk about that in our guidelines, where we talk about what universities in the global north need to do, and you know. Yeah, quality, of course, is something that we need to keep in mind, but still, there's this bias for credentials from the global north, and it's very much manifested in the global health landscape. So thank you for that intervention.
Next one is Ushma.
Yes, thank you so much, Sam. This is really such a provocative and important presentation. I'm really grateful for it. You know, in the last couple of weeks, I've been sitting in on several international meetings where the discussion is around, channeling health technologies into low middle income country settings. And in most of them, I'm the only African in the room. And it's really quite fascinating to see how it's still happening, and often, so that's one point I wanted to make. And then when that happens, and there's a sense of, you feel if you don't attend the meeting, there's no African voice, but it's inappropriate for you to be seen as the African voice as well. So I think that's really been quite a challenging situation that I've experienced, and it's so pervasive. I'm actually quite surprised. And then the other point I wanted to make was that data sharing often means data movement to the north. So, and that the analysis, it's assumed that analytical capacity only exists in the global north. And so very often when the question arises, what are the data sharing barriers? It's really about how can we best get access to your data? And so I just feel that that's another area that's starting to become an increasingly important area within this, and that we need to start developing some engagement around that. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for that. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming. Diverse groups, diverse teams have better outcomes. So when you have no representation from the global south, or even minimal representation, like in your case, being the only person, then obviously the outcomes will always be biased. And it's shocking how few people realize this. And on the issue of data, that's one that is for the ages, and one that just continues to be such a big and problematic issue. I remember there's an organization I was working for, and right. So again, we are heavily reliant on soft funding, and we move from projects to projects. And so once a project is done, we are thinking of the next project. And so we can't dwell too much on the analysis. So we do the very superficial analysis, probably the primary objectives, and that's it. And yet we have we're overwhelmed with requests from students from the global north to come and use that data. In fact, there was one project that I implemented that I think there were like 10 master students from the global north that got their dissertations, that worked on their dissertations using the data set from, and I think there was only 1 or 2 people from Africa who worked on that. So it's a reality, and it's complex. There's so many contributors to that, but very valid intervention. Thank you for that.
Got Monica.
Hi, thank you very much for the great presentation. I just wanted to ask, because the narrative nowadays is moving very much towards allyship and co-creation. So my question was, are these just beautiful words, or have you seen it in action, like in your collaborations? Because what often happens is like priorities are set in the north, and then we're supposed to adapt because there's funding strings attached and all that. So I just wanted to see, to hear if you've had any experiences that you could share that have been actually around meaningful co-creation. Thank you.
Wow, that's an amazing point. And again, if you go to our website, we have a pledge for allies. So not people who are going to be members. So this assumes that you're from the global north, but you want to be a critical ally of this movement to tackle power imbalances. And we've got a few people signed up. We've not really followed up to see what becomes of that. But in everyday practice, I think, what the big challenge, I believe, one of the big challenges is where the funding is coming from. And if you have a situation where the funding forces a marriage, let me put it that way, for lack of a better term, between the global north and global south researchers, then it already puts the global south researchers on the back foot, right? And it might not even be obvious to our counterparts in the global north that because it's funding that requires that they be part of that application, they already have an oversized influence in that particular relationship and on that particular application. And so it takes people who are really aware and really sensitive and really enlightened or educated, who have unlearned years and years of ways of doing things, to say, hold up, we're going to cede power really to you to decide where this proposal goes and how we can be included, right? And to be honest, I've not seen that a lot. The funder that I work for is different. We don't have that requirement for our in fact, our mandate almost sort of prohibits us from requiring a global north partner to be on the proposal, right? Our mandate is purely, and perhaps that's why I'm comfortable talking about this issue. Our mandate is primarily to work with Global South researchers, right? So in that sense, in my day-to-day, I've not really seen that. The researchers from the Global South tend to have the power, and then they can decide who they bring on board. But then the weakness is that sometimes our agenda setting, right, we want to create a niche, we want to be very forward-looking, and so we might come up with a thematic that maybe Global South researchers have not really cut their teeth in that particular space. And that's Global South research, and the Global North researchers might know this, and when they see a call for proposals, they'll just use the Global South researchers as a front. In reality, they've done the hard work and probably will do much of the extraction of the intellectual, benefits, let me put it that way, of the project afterwards. So it's still not a perfect. I feel we can do more in terms of ensuring that we are. That we don't avoid such situations where, even by virtue of the thematics that we choose to fund, that we don't sort of create a backdoor for this predatory kind of practices to occur. I know I've not directly answered your question, but I'm just trying to say it's something that exists. It's something I've seen in my practice where researchers from the global north have sort of said, let's co-create together. I have a grant from Hewlett Foundation, and we are co-creating with our colleagues from UC Berkeley, and that better to ensure that power dynamic doesn't manifest as often as it does.
Thanks, Sam. There's a comment from Nandi. I don't know if you want to speak to it, Nandi, or should I read?
Please go ahead.
So what should we be doing in our own countries? Should we even be engaging with the terms global health, which have been well defined as doing health research elsewhere, which clearly encompasses othering? I think we should resist the terminology and refrain from setting up departments of global health.
That's a powerful one, and I don't want to be drawn into semantics, but in terms of what we need to do, I think we just need to, first of all, start having these conversations, and that's really why we started this movement, because my initial introduction into this sphere of thinking was in spaces that were really driven by academics in the global north. Surprise, surprise. And again, I find myself being in the only room, being the only person from the global south in the room trying to have these conversations. And again, I'm not representative of the voices in the global south. I'm just one person. So I think the more we begin to have these conversations, the more we write about it, we blog about it, we tweet about it, we organize webinars like this, we publish, I think, and that we create this critical mass of people from the global south, then I think even the funders will need to take us seriously, that things need to change. And that's why we actually even came up with we decided to take a pragmatic lens, we apply a pragmatic lens, because again, a lot of the conversations in the global north about decolonizing global health are very, very academic. And I'm not trying to demean or diminish the importance and value of what they're doing. But, that I've been struggling to see that link from that translation from theory to practice. And this is such an important issue that is having such an important impact on the daily lives of people that, yeah, it'd be a shame if it's trapped in just academic thinking, as important as that is. And so that's why we are really trying to emphasize this approach of pragmatism.
Pancho, is that an old hand?
Yes, that's an old hand.
That's an old hand. So there's Prof. London and Monica.
So I think that the issues are really important, and I think there are different constituencies we have to think about. So, because we've been talking about funders, we've been talking about sort of policy, we've been talking about journals, and they're all kind of part of this whole complex play of power, but I guess they need different responses. So, the way we deal with journals and how they kind of prejudice publication in different ways requires certain kinds of things about how journals get held to account to journal standards, codes of ethics, etc., where dominance is not allowed. When it comes to funders, there's clearly the political dimension. So I think maybe something would be helpful if, and I think the code that the organization developed does speak to who does what, and I think that's very helpful for us to think about how we can invest our time and efforts into tackling different parts, but they all have to change together. The sum is more than the, what is it? The sum is more than the balance of the whole is more than the sum of the parts. That's it. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely, Prof. And we try to address these different constituencies, but for us, it's a living document. And as the membership grows, I've been definitely open to how we can improve it, how we can address more issues that were excluded. But for us, it was critical to just get that first document out there and get people talking and thinking about how we can try to contribute to reshaping the landscape. So you're absolutely right. It's not going to be a magic bullet that's going to reform the field. We'll need to have different approaches to different constituencies. So thank you for that, Prof.
There's a hand from Ziki.
Thanks, Itu. Thanks, Samuel. I mean, that was lovely. So for me, what I feel strongly about is really the damage that is done to communities that are over-researched. And I would really love an approach that has consideration for those communities where the research is linked to development. And in fact, that poster that you have there, I Can't Breathe, I would imagine that it applies to these communities. I mean, if you think about the people from Khayelitsha, Gugulethu, Soweto, because everybody is going to those places. They do what they need to do, they live, and then the next, there's the next round of research that must be carried out. And one does not see what impact that is having on the members of the community, and also what growth is achieved within those particular communities. And so I would imagine that as people who are working within those spaces, there should be a call where 10% of whatever funding is generated is directed towards community development. Or 5%, well, one can start with 1%. But I mean, I think we need to get to a point where there is some benefit that accrues to the community, whether it's around developing the education of the people who reside in those areas, whether it's around community projects that would in themselves contribute towards the development of the people who live in those communities. But I mean, you just see people coming in. I know in the north of South Africa, they talk about helicopter researchers, people who come in, land, do what they need to do and leave. And there's this whole concept around mining of data. And we know that data now is the new gold. And so if we allow, this gold again to exit our shores, as had happened with real mining, with the diamonds and everything else, it means that we are going to be left, or rather the people who reside in those communities are going to bear the brunt of the research that is carried out, by different individuals. Because, I mean, whilst we have ethical approval, if you are not on the ground, you don't know what's happening. People do what they need to do and they leave. And then you have the next round of people who want to come in and do research.
No, that is such an important point, and I couldn't agree more. And it's one constituency that it's not even in our guide, because we were addressing it towards our colleagues in the global north. But that's such an important point. This harm that we are doing to and we are even beginning to see some reactions. We are seeing hostilities in some of the informal settlements here in Kenya, for example, that have been over-researched. You go there as a researcher, and there's such a huge barrier for you to get in. There are cartels who now know how they can try to squeeze resources out of you to give you, like gatekeepers, let me put it that way. And sometimes there's just outright hostility. And I think we need to be careful not to be accomplices in perpetuating some of these harms to the community. So I couldn't agree more with your point. Thank you for that.
Thanks. That's it from the comments and the hands. Carmelita and Sam. Carmelita, you're
We
muted.
can't hear you, Carmelita.
How's that?
Yes, now we can hear you.
Perfect.
Thanks. So we have about, less than 5 minutes left, for about 4 minutes left, and I want to know if anybody has any suggestions or comments they would like to make. Yes, please, go ahead. We have an in-person. Yay!
How's it going?
There you go.
Hi, how's it going? My name is JD. I'm from the United States, studying at UCT. And my question is about, African descendant researchers who are from places like the United States, Canada, and Europe. Those of us in public health, I was wondering, what do you feel like our role is in decolonizing global health in Africa, although we're not from an African country?
Well, I mean, this is home just as much as it is for us, for you. And I think at the end of the day, again, I just want to reiterate that is not an us versus them, narrative that we're trying to push. We just want, some more sensitivity. We just want some more, care in the way that global health is practiced. And it doesn't matter who you are, because let's face it, there are also researchers in the global south who are, accomplices to some of these power imbalances, because it favors their careers, it favors their positions, and so they are hesitant to rock the boat, right? Because they feel like they'll suffer some kind of personal loss to whatever privileges and advantages they have. So long story short, I think it's just for us. It doesn't matter where you're from, right? You can be part of this movement We have a lot of our colleagues, some of our members actually based in the United States and in the UK, but of African descent. And the key thing is for us to speak out about these imbalances and to be part of the solution rather than being part of the problem.
Great, thank you. Anything else from anybody else?
There was a case Prof. London had perhaps might want to just mention.
Go ahead, Leslie.
So I don't really want to mention the case, it's in the chat, but I'm just thinking about what we can do. So I think, obviously, continuing this discussion would be really helpful. I think there are academics in the North who have been able to be reflective about their practice, and I think it would be nice to hear some of those experiences, because we don't want to get into a situation where it's like us and them, as Sam says. And maybe like the next seminar, we could invite somebody like that who's done that sort of work. There's somebody who's at the University of Washington who's done some really interesting work about the, I don't know, what's it, the CUGH, I don't know what it stands for. It's a US consortium on global health, consortium of universities on global health. Very critical, very deconstructing their power. And I think it would be interesting to hear how she's been received in her own context in the University of Washington, because she's challenging power from within. And I think that might be something to follow up. And certainly we've had lots of ideas, I think, about what we could do about, researching the problems of global health inequalities in this notion of how it works. So I think there are lots of ideas we could think about, maybe as part of the Transformation Committee afterwards.
Yeah, we'll definitely be continuing the discussion, and we will be sort of getting everyone informed via the infomailer. So just keep a watch out on the infomailer, as we will try to communicate a lot of what the transformation, this particular event onwards. I think we're sort of about to run out of time, and again, I want to just say a big thank you to Sam for a wonderful presentation, and a very, very deeply needed one that we can continue this discussion with. And I think it's important from our side that we keep on focusing on the practice of decolonization. I think that's critical for our own growth as well. Sam, would you like to just, any final words or any?
No, just to say thank you for the opportunity and to encourage everyone. Let's create the spaces where these conversations happen. Thank you, Prof, for that way forward and bringing someone from the global North, even bringing funders, bringing researchers, bringing policymakers to the table to have these conversations, bringing people from the community as well. I think there's a whole lot of constituencies that need to be brought to the table. So thank you for that way forward, and thank you to all for inviting me.
Thanks, Sam. And then one last sort of admin thing, there is a short evaluation in the chat. If you could please complete that and send it to us, that our contact information is on there. Again, thank you to the school for allowing us to present at the noon meeting. Julian, have I mentioned or forgotten anything?
I think that's it, Carmelita. There are questions about the recording. So Simpiwe does, after a day or two, give the link, or rather put the webinar on the school's YouTube channel.
Thank you.
So the link will be available, and we can ask comment to also circulate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Julie as well for getting this all arranged so quickly for us to have this space and to have this conversation as well. And so to close off, thank you everybody, and goodbye.